Не, ну давайте я сам. Я сейчас. Нет, перед лекцией. Можно я тут?
Okay, good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for coming. And we are happy today to host a prominent person, the best player in the history, and the outstanding political figure. Mr. Kasparov, thank you very much for being with us this evening, and we are really very happy because this gives us opportunity to engage ourselves in very interesting and important discussion with you. So first you present your presentation, and then we open the floor to the questions. Please.
Good evening. As agreed, this lecture will be delivered in English. Yeah, so it's probably a good political choice because yesterday in the Free University I spoke in Russian. So it's always nice to keep a balance. It's a European house. It's quite amazing, because it's just we all tend to make plans, sometimes very long plans for distant future. But life is quite tricky, and very often our plans being refuted, even way beyond our imagination. So just I chose for a cover picture of my lecture, Geopolitical Challenge of the 21st Century. It's quite a tentative title, but I hope my presentation will be very much inside this topic. And I also put 4 covers of my book, How Life Imitates Chess. There are many more than 4. Actually, the book has been published in 25 or 26 countries, 23 languages. So there are 4 here, including an American one, and I can recognize one in the corner. So that's. I know there are books published in China, Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan. Yeah, so someone else probably could do it better. Obviously I thought about my previous trips to Tbilisi, and most of them were made in the days of the Soviet Union. And I had a picture. I'm 12 years old, Tbilisi, 1976. First time I won a major title. I became the USSR champion, the junior champion under 18, and I was just 12. Yeah, so it was 35 years ago, and I could make all sorts of plans, and probably many of my dreams materialized. I became eventually the world champion and won many tournaments, and another good or not so good thing happened to me. But it was still, if I was told in 1976 that 35 years later, many years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, I will be speaking in Tbilisi, delivering speech in English, I'm not sure, I would be comfortable even just to comprehend this idea. But it's a good lesson that things change, and very often they change even before we can appreciate the magnitude of this, and even before we can actually adjust to this change. So for today's lecture, I wanted to stick with my original concept, which I introduced to every public event, since I can proudly say that never in my life I delivered the same lecture twice, the same speech, because I always try to connect it to the date and venue. So we talked a little bit about the venue already, so there are many ties between my biography and Tbilisi. But there's also date. And date today is February the 15th. Again, for me, it's an important date. In 1985, Florencio Campomanesvi, the president, closed. My first match was Anatoly Karpov. But it's a very personal story, and frankly speaking, it's not directly related to the subject that we are about to discuss today. So I wanted to look for something that is relevant. And certain things that happened on February 15 that I believe are important, and they will help us to go through this concept of geopolitical challenges, even to be more precise about the change in the nature of geopolitical challenges in the last 100 years. So the first event I'm going to mention might seem totally irrelevant for today's politics. It's distant and unrelated. But it was one of the very important moments of the geopolitical challenges of the 20th century, World War II. So on February 15, 1942, it was the date of probably one of the largest military disasters of British Empire, when Singapore was taken over by Japanese troops. It was a horrible disaster, not just militarily, but also psychologically, because just a couple of weeks before, Winston Churchill meeting American President Franklin Delano Roosevelt reassured him that Singapore was an unassailable fortress. Okay, fine. So it didn't stand even for 2 weeks, the siege. Why I just mentioned that? Because looking backward, we may not appreciate the danger for the world in 1942. The year when the Axis powers, Japan, Germany, and Italy, were on the rise. Germany was advancing in the Soviet Union, also in Africa, and Japan, after Pearl Harbor, was going from one victory to another. So it was a crucial moment, and we are lucky that eventually the table was turned. And this war, the Great War, actually ended up with the victory of allies. As a matter of fact, even Churchill was not aware about the vulnerability of Singapore, and he just, when he was talking to Roosevelt, he believed in what he said. So, by the way, it shows us that we have to be well aware about the weaknesses, and complacency is the worst ally in a serious situation in a war. So why I think it's important to remember, it's not just because the war was won and Nazism was defeated, both in the West and in the East. It also was probably the last moment when it was clear definition of good and evil, black and white. So we could easily recognize the ultimate evil and the danger from Nazis to the world. Then our world moved into the era of Cold War. And suddenly things became a little bit more complicated. It was free world versus communist regimes, but Stalin was not treated, and Stalin and Soviet regime were not treated with the same contempt as Hitler. Stalin was even twice on the cover of Time magazine. Yeah, and many people in the West, they couldn't recognize the danger represented by this regime, and as I said, the picture quickly became quite murky.